I, like a lot of you, have been thinking about Deltarune non-stop since Chapter 3 and 4 dropped, and especially after Undertale's anniversary stream, I'm not how to be obsessed with it. That beautiful speech Toby did at the end resonated with me so deeply and with how I think about media in general. With that line, the underground is as big as you want it to be, got me thinking a lot about Deltarune and its theorizing community, especially about how different its theory is compared to one another, especially before Chapter 3 and 4, but even after those. There are so many theories and interpretations of the Deltarune universe that are vastly different from each other. Stuff I thought as canon after playing the new chapters for the first time have been constantly questioned and challenged, yet everything makes sense if you're in the right mindset. While thinking about this, though, something came to my mind. A little thought that, like a brushing a white canvas, was painting a new way for me to see Deltarune's world, and that new perspective led to the realization that maybe interpretation is way more important than we think for the Deltarune universe, and it might be the only way to actually subvert the prophecy. Now, this theory has been in my mind at least the second drop of the Spamton sweepstakes, but I never really had any valid argument for it other than it feels right. But after chapter 3 and 4, and especially after Undertale's 10th anniversary, I even feel so confident about it that I made an entire YouTube channel just to post this theory, so you can probably tell I'm excited to talk about it. By now you're probably thinking what I mean by interpretation is more important than we think, and we'll get to that. But first we need to revisit and talk about Deltarune's prophecy and why I think people don't understand it. We first learn about the prophecy from Rousey at the start of Chapter 1's Dark World, in Castletown. He stated, "Once upon a time, a legend was whispered among the shadows. It was a legend of hope, it was a legend of dreams, it was a legend of light, it was a legend of dark." This is the legend of Deltarune. For millennia, light and dark have lived in balance, bringing peace to the world. If this harmony were shattered, a terrible calamity would occur. The sky will run black with terror, and the land will crack with fear. Then, her heart pounding, the earth will draw her final breath. Only then, shining with hope, three heroes appear at the world's edge. A human, a monster, and the prince from the dark. Only they can seal the fountains and banish the angels' heaven. Only then, balance will be restored, and the world will be saved from destruction. This is a really bad summary of the actual prophecy we see in Chapter 4, as Rousey mentions during said chapter. And it was most definitely skipping the parts of the prophecy that he didn't want to tell Chris and Susie right away, stuff like the Titans and how the roaring actually happens, and more importantly, the actual end of the prophecy. He did this because, as he says himself in that scene in Chapter 4, knowing things hurt, and if anyone's going to hurt, might as well be him. After Chapter 1, we didn't learn anything about the prophecy until we got to Chapter 4, where it was quite literally written on the walls in the Dark World. A prophecy which whispered among the shadows that described in simple rhymes and pictures the story of Deltarune. Up to that point, with some few extras about the future, it talked about the protagonist with panels scattered around the Dark World. The girl, the prince, and the cage. It also talked about characters we met before. The pointy-headed that said toothpaste and then boy, Queen and her chariot that cannot be stopped, and the Lord of Screens with clip red fire blood. This was honestly a lot to take in. We could finally read the prophecy that dictates the world we're playing. But these revelations separated the community in big palettes of opinions. There's these people who think the prophecy is breakable, and that has been broken already. The people that think the prophecy is completely fake, and it doesn't matter. It can be changed or broken just by not doing what it says. And the arguably smaller group of people that think the prophecy can be broken, but we, somehow, are going to allow Susie to break it. Why does such a huge piece of irrefutable evidence about the world cause such a big divide on the community? Because the prophecy is really, really vague. And I don't mean the information that gives us, I mean the prophecy itself. Every panel, except with few exceptions, is vague about what it's talking about. They don't mention any names except for some reason Kanotynes, and the images that accompany the text in the panels barely resemble the characters that they're referring to. I think this is why people constantly misunderstand the prophecy, because they try really hard to use it as hard truth, when in the game it has been constantly stated that the prophecy is not at all a word-to-word script of Deltarune. For example, Ralsei is not that aware of many of the things the prophecy could have said if it was a word-to-word script. The prophecy is more vague and confusing than that. And the reason why people think this is because they're mixing two different things that Ralsei knows. During that conversation in Chapter 4, Ralsei mentions that what they know are the rules of this world, the Deltarune world, and about the prophecy, and understandably, people took this as Ralsei calling the prophecy the rules of the world. But there is a difference. He separates the rules and the prophecy in this dialogue. He could have said something like the prophecy that rules the world, or something like that. But he separated the rules and the prophecy as two different things. Now, I know some of you all won't agree with my interpretation of this dialogue, but even if you don't agree, there is still a difference stated in game, because the game implies that the rules Ralsei mentions are quite literally the rules of Deltarune as a game. Stuff like combat mechanic, what items each character can keep, how puzzles are solved, what is everyone supposed to do in battle. All of these things are gameplay mechanics that Ralsei somehow knows about and are quite literally the rules of the world. We have a lot and lots of evidence that Ralsei is aware of us, the player. He talks to us through Chris. He teaches us combat mechanics that shouldn't make sense to Chris or Susie. He talks about the buttons you're supposed to press, and even Susie questioned it during Chapter 1. And the fact that Ralsei looked at us, the player, in Chapter 3 after Susie said that Chris made her put on the ribbon. I know some people don't think that Ralsei is looking at us, but his sprite literally looked directly into the screen, so I really can't be convinced otherwise, implying that he's aware of not only our existence, but also our control over the game and our ability to control characters better than Chris. I feel like this qualifies as the rules Ralsei was talking about way more than the prophecy would. That's why I think that he was talking about two different things in this dialogue, especially because the prophecy never mentions any rules by itself. I think he knows about gameplay mechanics and the rules of the game Deltarune, and he knows the prophecy by heart, and that's what makes him hurt, his knowledge of everything there is to know of the world that all of them live in. He knows the limits and the future of their reality, and it's too much for a little adorable goat like him. Now that we established what the rules of this world are, and why I think they're different from the prophecy, now we can start talking about the prophecy itself. As I mentioned earlier in this video, I don't think people understand the prophecy in a lot of ways, mostly because people have been fighting a lot about who the heroes really are, especially the girl, the second hero. The argument is basically this, but the silhouette has a sword, so it can't be Susie, but it doesn't have antlers, so it cannot be Noelle, which, as valid as an interpretation they are easily disputed, with nothing stopping Susie from holding the sword once, and Noelle could have her antlers shred, and there is no way you could refuse that given the panel itself. The panels are intentionally vague. The tape can resemble both of them easily, and I feel like people are forgetting that's the point. The panels never show an accurate depiction of the character they foretold about. Lancer looks way more star-shaped. Quinn's panel is just a crude drawing of a car. Tina's is funnier. It's just a TV with a line through it. The TV doesn't even look like Tina. Kanotynes looks like that stupid S we all draw. The Roaring Knight panels looks like two hands and a knife. None of them looked like their respective characters, except maybe Asgore's, but we don't know yet because we don't have his artwork design yet. But still, that's 1 to 5. And this is especially obvious with the hero panels. The cage with human soul and parts is depicted as two hands around a heart-shaped object, most probably and obviously the soul. But guess what? Chris doesn't look like that. Chris is not two hands floating around. And then the prince, alone in the deepest dark, depicts a cloaked figure with fire floating around them. Not only his cloak doesn't look like that, but he also has no fire spells that look like that. It's close enough, but it's only obvious that it's him because we have no other Prince of Darkness. And here is why I always argue that if no other panel looks a one-to-one to their respective characters, why would the panel of the girl be different? Why would it depict the perfect portrayal of the character that was foretold? Well, I'd say that it doesn't, and that's the point. You are not supposed to tell who is who just by their panels, and the community is using that image of the panel as the sole argument for the question, who is the second hero? When we ignore the panel and focus on the text and the context around it, the question is way deeper, way more interesting. Now we must ask more questions other than if X or Y characters look like the image on the panel. Of course, this is not to discredit those ideas or these theories, it's just that, in my personal opinion, I think they're flat. The game never shows us that the panels are supposed to be a one-to-one to the characters they represent, and basing the entire argument around the image and not the text feels like we're forgetting the most important part of the puzzle. Now that we talk about why I think basing the prophecy entirely of the pictures on the panels is very flawed, now we can talk about the actual theory. This theory is simple. The prophecy is vague on purpose. It's supposed to be vague, at least for narrative purposes, because you're supposed to interpret it, not take it at face value. This is because of how the panels themselves are shown and written, especially because it's written with rhymes and it's not describing a concrete event or character, or gives any explanation of the details of said event, and as we established before, it also doesn't show any facts that could or could not relate to the characters that they depict. It normally only depicts two phrases or use a few words. To show my point, we'll take one panel from the prophecy. For example, this one. A world basked in purest light, beneath it grew eternal light. When it shows a sun in the top left and a lot of eyes in darkness in the bottom right. Obviously the panel isn't 100% accurate at all, but they are good enough to get the point across. Here the interesting thing is the dialogue. Because if the prophecy was 100% accurate to how the world works, then you expect the dark world to be literally under a world completely full in light, but that is not true, obviously. Not only the light world is not always basking light, but the dark worlds are literally under the earth. You have to stab the earth with a blade while putting your entire will onto it. It's not literal, it's implying how the dark worlds exist in the universe and how they work, which is not 100% accurate to how they actually work. And here's the thing, this panel gives us a bit of information so we could take our own conclusions from it. It's like an artistic prompt. If I gave this rhyme to a group of artists who don't know anything about Deltarune to use as an idea to create their own worlds, then these worlds would be vastly different. One of them might think of it as good and evil, make a world about angels and demons. Maybe one takes it as more of a metaphor. They might portray the light world as a high-class society and the dark world as lower-class society, and the world is about class difference and classism. Maybe one of them takes the prompt and makes it an MLB infection at you, but still the same prompt. In all of those worlds, you could put this prophecy panel and it still would make sense. And this logic not only applies to this panel, but it also applies to every other panel. Let's do the same to a hero panel, the cage with human soul and parts. Some people may understand this as a literal cage made of human parts and still contains a person's soul. Or maybe a robot with a soul. Or maybe something like a cage that contains the soul of an immortal lich. All of this makes sense as a cage with a human soul and parts, but none of them are Chris. I would really like to run an experiment like that, to have a bunch of artists draw what they take from a Deltarune prophecy panel. It would be really fun. A lot of you are probably thinking that this is meaningless, and that it's obvious that this thought experiment has nothing to do with the actual story of Deltarune. And this panel has an obvious correlation with the main storyline, and the fact that it could be interpreted as something else doesn't matter to the story. But they have an example of this happening in Deltarune. The Lord of Screens, script read by Blade, is Tinal's panel. It foretold him being cut down by the night using their blade, and it also foretold that it would look red for some reason. And it literally happened. No matter what you do, Tina gets clipped red by Blade in every round of the game. But here's the thing, if you recruit every darkner in TV world, Tina survives the encounter with the Knight. So she asks for help from the darkners to save him, but if you don't recruit them, then Tina dies, like literally dies. So she asks for help when no one wants to help him. The prophecy was true in both situations, but its result is different. This is a perfect example of what I mean with the prophecy being vague on purpose. If the prophecy was accurate and unbreakable, then it would say something like, Tina, the Lord of Screens, dies by being clipped red by Blade. But it doesn't. It never specifies what happens after what the prophecy foretold. And this is undeniable proof that the prophecy is malleable, that our actions change how the prophecy plays out. But the prophecy and what it foretold never changes. But here's another problem I have with the way people understand the prophecy. A lot of people think that the prophecy can be broken by just not doing what it says. And they use Queen's panel to justify it because it says the Queen's chariot cannot be stopped. And when Chris goes into Queen's card, it literally stopped a lot of times. But there's a really bad flaw in this logic. The prophecy never says why or how it can't be stopped. So technically, the card could move forever, or hit a wall, or run in a giant treadmill for eternity, and the prophecy would still be correct. So when the card starts going in the game and it can't be stopped by hitting other hands, it still applies. It's still accurate to the prophecy, because there are no rules on what it's making the card not to be able to stop. If the prophecy was 100% accurate in detail, it would say something like, Wizard will not stop no matter what, or something like that. But it's not 100% accurate, it's vague on purpose. Each and every single one of the prophecy panels that shows something from the past became true one way or another. But the context behind it, the way it became true, was never set in stone. This implies that we can't go against the prophecy. No matter what we do, no matter how hard we try, we can't go against it. But we can reinterpret it. That's how we're gonna beat it. If you're still not convinced, please look at the duration of this video because I still have tons of evidence to prove my point. And at the end, I'll talk about how I think this connects to the shadow crystals and what I think the last prophecy is and how we're going to change the future. Chapter 4 was the chapter about the prophecy. Everything in it related back to the prophecy in so many different ways. Like the panels that we already talked about, that are all over the 3 different dark worlds. And this is what we're gonna talk about next. The 3 different dark worlds. Because did you ever question why Toby decided to make 3 different dark worlds for one chapter? From now on, I will call each dark world by their soundtrack. So, the first one will be the Dark Sanctuary, the second dark world will be the second Sanctuary, and the third will be the third Sanctuary. So it's easier to understand if you are just listening to the video. The Dark Sanctuary was made by the Roaring Knight. Its color palette is primarily blue with some brown and orange accents. Its music theme is called Dark Sanctuary, and most importantly, the Dark Fountain gives Gerson's dust life again, making him the main turner during chapter 4. He becomes the Old Man, and during this chapter we can also fight him, and he'll give us the Shadow Crystal and the Axe of Justice, the best slot weapon for Susie. Going with the theory that December Holiday, aka Death, is the Roaring Knight, this dark world makes a lot of sense. We know that the Dark dark worlds reflect the will of the creators. Because of the extreme differences between Chris's Dark World, Chapter 3 to the rest of Dark Worlds. The B world reflects their lives and takes bits and pieces of their thoughts, personality, likes and dislikes to form a world around their house. We also know this from the second fountain of this chapter, but we'll get to that. Knowing that Tessa's will is the one who manifested this world, then it makes sense that the world is so blue and cold with so few warm areas. It's possible that she shares a lot of similarities with Carol. After all, Noel and Rudy share a lot of design choices, so it would make sense that Tess shares a lot with Carol. It also makes sense when Gerson would be brought back to life in a dark world made by December. Rousey said that darkness, based upon the memory of loved ones, can only manifest in very specific darknesses, implying that the creator of this dark fountain was someone who cared deeply about Gerson. Death most definitely had Gerson as a teacher, and knowing Gerson's preferred archetype of mentee or pupil, I think it's not hard to imagine that she was mentored by Gerson, and that's why this fountain brought him back to life. Death deeply cared about Gerson, and this dark world reflects that. Another thing that the Dark Sanctuary manifests as piano-based puzzles. We know for a fact that Des loved to play music. Tena calls Des a little musical prodigy, which gives us the idea that Des is really musically inclined. So it makes sense that in a dark world created by Des, in a place with a piano on it, the piano would have a big role. Then there's the funniest moment in Deltarune so far in my opinion, Jackenstein's battle. And even if this battle is mostly a joke, there are so much to talk about if we take the perspective of Des. First off, Des probably knows about Jackenstein, or at least his Light World counterpart from previous hometown festivals. He is decoration for the festival, so it would make sense she knows about him. Second, his whole battle is about being trapped in darkness trying to find a way out. This is interesting because on the unused dialogue of chapter 3, dialogue that most people can agree comes from Des, she says this: "What is this place anyway? How did I get here?" As if I haven't asked that question a million times already. I always did have that nightmare, walking into darkness with a light shining from the doorway. Then the door slams behind me, and everything goes black. Is this that nightmare? Or was everything else a dream? Here, she talks about a recurring nightmare she has, where she walks into darkness and someone slams the door behind her, and Jackenstein's fight literally goes about that exact situation. We, the soul, escape from a dark place that looks like a big mansion, like the Holiday Manor, for example, by searching for a key to open a door that shines light through. It's literally the same situation. Jackenstein's fight is quite literally Tess's nightmare. This is such an interesting thing to think about, how the dark world manifested a nightmare Tess had. This may apply to other stuff in other chapters, like Iram for example. That's for another video, if you guys are interested. Another interesting thing about this fight is that background for one of Jackenstein's attacks shows a 4x4 grid with some of the squares containing different symbols. As the community quickly pointed out, these symbols relate to major characters in Deltarune. The crown is king, the second crown is queen, the knife is Chris, the knight piece is the roaring knight, the bishop is Garrison, and the flower is Asgore, this one being a reference to chapter 5. This is another example of the prophecy being everywhere in the Star World. It's also interesting how it only goes to chapter 5, the same length that the Lord of the Hammer had. As Gerson said, it was never finished. This in my head would imply that December is also afraid of the prophecy. Now, the reason why I went into such lengths to explain each thing that makes this dark fountain relate to December holiday in so many ways is because of how much it contrasts with the dark fountain of the next Star World, the second sanctuary. This dark world was opened by Susie in the same place that Dark Sanctuary's fountain was opened, after trying to open the door leading to the main room of the church and where the knight is, because this door needs a code and she believes Gerson might know it. Good thing to point out is that she really wanted to see Gerson again. She uses Chris's knife and stabs the air, putting all her will into the blade. And with a red glowing eye, she opens the fountain. The second sanctuary changes the dark of the world. The first thing you'll notice is that Susie and Chris look different. Their color palette have a noticeable hue shift, making Susie look more orange and Chris paler and redder. This could imply that because of Susie's mental image of Chris looks different in her dark world. But this also just a thought. The dark world itself also had a hue shift, now looking more purple with yellow and cool lights, exactly like Susie's light world color palette. The dark world is different as well, not only changes color, but the orientation of the structures are also all over the place. Many of the original darkners need to stone and new was manifest, and also the layout of the dark world is so different, especially it is upside down. Quite literally, we walk in the ceiling of the big piano room. Now the pianos work differently. You're not supposed to play a song that the prophecy panels give you. Now you have to ride it while crashing with the walls of the area. This is not only accurate with Susie's taste of explosive destruction, but also it relates with an experience Susie had in the past, where she tried to play the piano, but people around her stopped her that she wasn't allowed to play, even if it was a public piano. Later that night, she came back when no one was around and smashed the piano in frustration. She doesn't really know if it damaged the piano, but she put all her strength to it. And because of this experience, it makes sense that in a dark world made by Susie, the piano will manifest as a destructive force. And lastly, in one of the rooms of this dark world, there are two NPCs, and when you talk to them, they ask, whose dream is this? Chris's dream? Susie's dream? Whose dream is this? Night's dream? My dream? Whose dream is this? You left it here. Another thing you might immediately notice is that the prophecy looks different. It glows purple now instead of the original blue that had in the Dark Sanctuary. And the order changed as well. We don't see the prophecy panels in the same order as we did in the SS Fountain. Right after the start of the prophecy, we jump immediately to the hero panels. Especially right after Susie mentions how happy she is knowing that she is a part of the prophecy. It actually shows a lot of panels that relate to the second hero, especially the second hero panel and the loves find its way to the girl panel. This is probably because Susie sees herself as the second hero, and the Dark World manifests it, making her panel be the most common one. This also explains why the last prophecy appears from behind a lot of the panels that relate to Susie. In the Dark Sanctuary, Susie mentions that it might be easier to follow the prophecy word to word. So now that the second sanctuary is giving her the way to save the world, the final prophecy. It's the most important thing of the second sanctuary, without counting that scene. In this Dark World, Gerson's hammer didn't manifest Gerson, but a statue of himself, manifesting a storm-like darkner that looks like him, a statue of him. Because Susie didn't know Gerson in life, and after that scene, Susie and Chris go and close the fountain Susie made, after getting the code from the fire extinguisher. When Susie and Chris open the door, separating them from the night, darkness leaks into the room, manifesting the original Dark Sanctuary again, but still a bit different. If you backtrack, you won't be able to find Gerson. From now on, we will be in the third sanctuary. This one is so interesting. The first thing we see is a lot of prophecy panels lighting up a dark background of a glass corridor, which is a beautiful sight by the way. And using the next room, we can see how the colors of the background change. The background became even more messy. The structures are all over the place, upside down, sideways and overlapping with each other, forming this beautiful collage colored with blues, greens and purple highlights. And the music is an amazing composition, mixing many time signatures in a song that seems to be a combination between the Dark Sanctuary and the Second Sanctuary in a beautiful song. The number of videos about this song alone is crazy. All about the Third Sanctuary seems to be about mixing up the first and second Dark Worlds. Has a little bit of this and a little bit of Susie. The colors, the layout, the darkness and the music all seem to be mixed and matched from the other two worlds, from the two different people that contributed to this darkness. Nothing much other than the final boss fight of the chapter happens here. Just by how it looks and acts, you can see how important it is. These dark worlds were mostly about the prophecy. The prophecy was in the walls, it was in the fights. Gerson in his fight that we will talk about later in this video also talks about the prophecy. And the main problem in the entire chapter is about Ramsey not being able to share the end of the prophecy of fear of hurting Chris and Susie. But here's the reason I went in detail with them. It's because of the second main theme of the chapter and these dark worlds. Perspective. The first two fountains were created in the same place, with the same objects and the same areas. They should have been the same, or at least very similar to each other, but they are vastly different. Some areas are literally upside down from each other. The darkness are different. Some of them are turned into stone and others come back to life. The music is so different and even the colors are different. And the third dark world is a combination of the two. The darkness created by Susie's perspective, linking it to Tessa's perspective. All of these relate to the perspective of each character around the place they created, the fountain. The piano is a useful tool used for puzzles and songs in Tessa's perspective, but a destructive and dangerous tool in Susie's perspective. And the respective dark worlds represented perfectly. The best example is the existence of Gerson Boom in Tessa's dark world. The old man Gerson manifested out of the memories of death. This is something we already clarified, but we never really went in depth on why it didn't for Susie. After all, Susie stabbed the earth with the intention of meeting Gerson again. She cared about him and wanted to have more time with him, but when the fountain was created, it didn't manifest Gerson at all. It manifested a statue of him. With our knowledge of how dead worlds work and how they manifest stuff, this makes sense. Susie didn't know Gerson alive. She only knew him from another dark fountain. Therefore, when creating her own dark fountain, the darkness couldn't manifest him, because she doesn't know Gerson Boom enough to manifest him. This is extremely interesting, and if y'all are interested, I'd like to make another video about how dark fountains work and how they choose what to manifest and what not to manifest, so let me know if you're interested. But back to Gerson, he can be manifested again because Susie didn't know him. Her perspective of him was based around him in the dark world. She knows him as the old prankster, but wise and capable in combat. Yet this is only one part of who he was in life. Yes, he was wise, he was capable, and he was a top-tier rage baiter. But he was also a teacher, a writer, a historian, a priest. He has a wife and a kid. He has so much history with the people of hometown. But Susie doesn't know this. She only knows him as a wise and capable old man that likes to annoy people. That's why when the fountain tried to manifest Gerson back to life, it only brought a statue, because the statue is symbolic but incomplete. It's only symbolic as a part of who he was, not as himself. This adds a lot to Tess' night theory. Tess probably knew him in life and knew all these things. So when she stabbed the earth with her will, it manifested him back again. The themes of perspective in relation with the dark worlds are really interesting, and they appear to be really important as well. After all, it's the most prevalent theme in the chapter, only behind the prophecy itself. This being the most important aspect of Deltarune's narrative up to this point. So why? Why did Toby make so much emphasis on a perspective and how it manifests in the dark worlds? Why is it so important? Well, have you noticed the one thing that never changes in the dark worlds? The color might change, the lights might darken, the music might be off, and the people around it might be different. But the one thing never changes. One thing stays the same even in vastly different worlds. The prophecy. And as the second save point in the Dark Sanctuary says, a glass tapestry rings above you. And strangely, no matter how you turn to look, and perspective never changes. The prophecy is an apathetic law, unbothered by feelings of the people of this world, and unbreakable by any means. No matter how much those people, no matter how much we try, we can't break the prophecy. Because even if it's broken, it always appears somewhere else. The prophecy can be changed, after all. Even if it's broken, it always appears somewhere else. The prophecy can't be broken by simply not following it, because it will happen again later, and eventually you'll have to follow it. And I believe that's the entire point of the chapter. That's why it was so dedicated on talking about perspective in the Dark Worlds. Because we are supposed to see the prophecy from different perspectives. We're supposed to see the panels in different orders, in different ways, from up and down, in all possible colors, because we are supposed to reinterpret it. We're supposed to give it new context, so the result of the prophecy is better for us, and especially better for the fangang. And that's not everything I have to say about interpretation being important for the Deltarune story. Well, yet again, I asked you to check the video because I have so much more to talk about. Another piece of evidence for this story happens close to the start of the Dark Sanctuary, not so long ago after meeting Gerson and attempting to escort him to his study. There's a moment where, going up the stairs, we see how a prophecy panel breaks. When we go up to the stairs to see what happened, we find Gerson. He says he broke it by accident, because we were following the prophecy so closely that he couldn't see where he was going. Obviously, this is a part of the lesson he wants to teach Susie. Then, she and Ralsei leave through the path that was hidden behind the prophecy panel, and there you can speak with him and confront him about breaking the prophecy panel on purpose. And if we tell him that he broke it because he hates prophecies, he'll say this. Well now, a fairy tale is a pretty little thing. Ain't it nice to believe a glimmer here and there? I just think those words shine a bit too bright. A bed so blue, it's all you can see. So I say, why don't we go between the lines? It's darker there. Hehe. Interestingly enough, he mentions how the prophecy panels are blue, yet, as we discussed earlier, the prophecy panels are purple when Susie opens the Dark World. Reading between the lines is a phrase that we all know. When looking up a definition, most sources say that something similar to this. Look for or discover a meaning that is implied rather than explicitly stated. And if you remember, we literally did this with the prophecy panels before. It's literally the entire point of them. You are supposed to discover a hidden meaning in the text of the panels. Gerson is literally saying out loud, don't follow the text blindly. Look for hidden meanings. And as we established before, the hidden meaning is up to interpretation. And it can change depending on how you follow it. You quite literally can go between the lines. It happens with Tinel's panel. We can continue with the evidence for Chapter 4 being about interpretation with the egg room in Chapter 4. During the second sanctuary, at some point after climbing a tower, Susie and Chris split up, and then you can go to the right to the moth room. But this room has something way more interesting than that arguably very tasty moss. An egg room. This egg room has had a lot of discussion around it, especially around what it means for Chris. After all, the room looks like a hospital. The dialogue implies that this room is missing in a real hospital in Hometown. It's a psychiatry room. This with a dialogue that the main boss of the secret section of Chapter 3, the Sword Road, who I lovingly call Aram like a lot of fans, that implies that Chris has a violent or at least traumatic past. That's something we can talk about in another time, but here I want to focus on this dialogue. Well, there is a canvas here. Will you draw? Chris picks up a pencil. They began by sketching what they had seen behind the tree. But as they sketched, the line began to err as if the pencil had lost its way. So they started again, drawing over the lines they had already made. Many times they would suddenly halt, or the pencil drifted into another drawing that they started over again. Through many repetitions, their movement became faster and smoother, until without looking, they had completed a sketch in a single white line.
In the end, as a result of layering the sketches on top of each other, the surface of the canvas was nothing more than a monochrome smear. Next, a tree was painted over everything, leaving nothing but a simple, still life. After all, there wasn't anything to look in that room besides a single tree. Chris got up. It seemed the painting was complete. With her hand, smudged with graphite, was still moving as if it traced some unseen shape. My idea with this dialogue are very similar to a video called I Know DELTARUNE's Eggman by The Business, where they explain that for them, the eggroom are an Easter egg in its finest form, the first two rooms being found by pure chance or mindlessly repetition, being a reference to the first ever Easter egg in video game history, and how it relates to Toby Fox's experience with art. And I personally agree with this video and with this view of the eggrooms as well. Yet I also think it has to do with Deltarune's larger themes and narrative. After all, they seem to be very important, consider the copies are monochrome dialogue and everything about chapters 4 room. And especially considering the PlayStation exclusive trophies that show that for some reason the gunner maker boys does not like the eggrooms or do not appreciate us having the X with the little trophy of beating chapter X without issue relating to the X. And I think this is especially related to Chris and Chris's past and trauma because of their connection with the eggrooms and whatever is behind them. Chris drew in a canvas for a while, to the point that the entire canvas was covered in monochrome smear, and then a tree was painted over it. I interpret this as using the sketches Chris already had drawn as a base to draw the tree over it, like painting over a sketch or using an online base to draw your roses, or editing an existing piece to make it funnier. It used what it was already there to create something new, and this tree was covering whatever Chris was trying to draw, effectively hiding it from us and from Chris, which can be read as hiding something you dislike as a trauma response, but it can also be read as using something you dislike to create something you do like. It's like painting over a wall that has a color you don't like. And as a metaphor for coping mechanisms, it's a very common thing for artists to use their traumas, their history, their horrible moments in life to make art out of them. For example, it's very common to have your bad tendencies or traumas you go through life as backstory for your OCs in a lot of internet culture. And I think this eggroom represents that perfectly, using something that already exists and cover it with something you want to create. And this applies not only to trauma response but to art in general. Some people do their living by creating art about fixing existing material, and I feel like this is what this eggroom represents. I personally think that this chapter's eggroom is about Chris's past and what happened to them when December disappeared, but I also think it's about reinterpretation as well, in a more metaphorical way. Though arguably this isn't my strongest evidence for the story, I still think this is really important, not only for the lore of Deltarune, but for the themes of chapter 4 and the Deltarune narrative. After all, some people forget that Deltarune is not a puzzle to be solved, but a story to be told. Close to this eggroom though, there is an NPC that has a very unique dialogue that also relates to the idea of reinterpretation. This NPC appears in the area where you can enter chapters for eggroom. In this area there is also a prophecy panel, this one depicting two trees that we saw in the Spamto sweepstakes, and a house with the text only saying roots. When speaking with this NPC, he says that he heard something in between. This something in between probably refers to him hearing a sound from the eggroom, yet it was mixed up. Then he says a bunch of words scrambled, but when pieced together they form a phrase. Lost where the forest would grow, the children follow the pointed tail. I know this might be a bit of a stretch, but I think that this also plays into chapter 4's being about interpretation. There are many ways to rearrange these words, and some of them might make sense. But we know the correct one because of the Spamto sweepstakes. But this could be argued against very easily. Yet this is not the only reason I mention it. For me, this phrase reads as a prophecy panel. Lost where the forest would grow, the children followed the pointed tail. And considering how much this egg room reminds us that what's behind the tree is something important that Chris wanted to forget, then maybe the panels depicting this might be a part of the prophecy that was lost in time, as is mentioned during the church scene in chapter 4. And lastly, another evidence I have for this is the mic room. During the Light World segment in Chapter 4, you can go to Castletown and enter the building where you can play the rhythm minigame from Chapter 3. Inside of it, there is a room that asks for a number code. When you input the number 6453, the door will open. After solving some puzzles with the new floating hat mechanic, you will meet Mike, or at least one Mike, one of three. To keep the video easy to understand, we'll call the Mike Spectre minigames names. After all, Pluie wants to be called Pluie, so there are three different Mikes. Mutant, who is a Green Pippin, Jungler, who is a Sapper, and then Pluie, the Goat. These three Mikes are not real Mike. They're decided to act like Mike because Tina keep calling for Mike, yet they never met them, so they end up acting as Mike to appease Tina while they investigate who the real Mike is. And here is where the evidence starts. Each of the Mikes are dressed as different ways the fandom thought Mike could look like, but that is inspired by the common idea of Mike being short for a microphone. He looks like a microphone, and he literally is holding a microphone. Jungler is inspired by the Friend Inside Me meme. People thought that Mike could be a cowboy because of Toby's questionable parody song called Friend Inside Me. And then there's Pluie, the most interesting of the three. He dresses like a black cat with yellow and pink eyes. Exactly the same as Friend, who is a cat with yellow and pink eyes. And he has a tail that looks like a snake. And that's another kind of worms we won't open today. I am not sure if I can speak about that. I am completely out of the loop with the snake tail cat thing. I do want to focus on the fact that these characters, the Mikes, are literally characters inspired by the way we interpreted Mike during Chapter 2's hiatus era. Following with my metaphor from before, Mike was an artistic prompt, and but that Jungler and Pluie interpreted in three different ways. This is the exact situation I proposed before the prophecy panels. And it's also interesting to me that in a chapter so connected with the prophecy, Toby Fox decided to add this completely random room about reinterpretation. It feels on purpose. It feels like he wants us to connect these two ideas. I feel like he wants us to reinterpret the prophecy. With this idea in mind, going back through the chapter makes it even more obvious that this is an important connection that Toby wants us to make, because chapter 4 is not the only chapter about reinterpretation. Oh no, all of them are about reinterpretation. The entirety of Deltarune is about interpretation, and I can prove it. Chris and Noel from the start were really creative kids. They would give personalities to random objects and play pretend with them. We know this because during Chapter 3, we learned from Ram that Chris and Noel used to play with random stuff they found around hometown. Time flies. Seems like just yesterday you and that girl had everywhere here lined up. Queen on her side, King on your side, Tina on the back. Oh, it was chaos. Only kids like you two would take a laptop home just to play make-believe. How is she, Chris? Are you too? Well, that's alright. Everyone changes, except us. Chris had a moment. Ooh. This dialogue implies that Chris and Noel created Queen, King, Ran, and Tina at least. But I don't think this is the case entirely. Chris and Noel grabbed anything they could find and gave them personalities. They interpreted a laptop, a playing card, and a TV as characters with personalities and stories, which not only adds to my idea of how the Dark Wars work, being manifestations of the people who created them, but it also adds to my theory about reinterpretation. These kids manifested King, Queen, Ram, and Tina from their own imagination, using random objects as the base, basically giving them life inside the fountain. from their perspective as children. A random playing card was the king of the card kingdom, and an old laptop was the queen from the cyber world. It's the prompt situation all over again, but instead of a phrase, you give an artist a random object, and they must create an original character based around it. Wouldn't it be cool to run an experiment like that as well? Well, it actually already happened in real life. King, Lancer, Rudin, Clover, and Jewel all were designed by Kanotynes. Sorry if I botched your name. These designs were anthropomorphic versions of the playing cards they represent. These artists literally interpreted some random objects and then created original characters from that. And then Toby Fox saw those characters and interpreted them as the characters for Deltarune that we all know and love. Talking about RAM though, do you know something else in chapter 3 that relates deeply to the concept of reinterpretation? The entirety of the soul route. If you either get an S rank or a C rank in chapter 3, you can go to the backrooms area of the green room and access a place where you find a lone console with weird controllers. Ram found the game and let Chris know about it. The dialogue goes like this. You see, the game you've been playing is not exactly the original. Altena done a little something here, a little something there, and made the whole adventure some big old blasted line from A to B. Prime boring stuff. But if I know Chris, and boy do I know Chris, that's not what you want, ain't it? Freedom. That's what you want, champ, freedom. Well, if I can go hush-hush for a minute here, Chris love, that's what we have backstage. The original game where you decide what to do. Alright, enough explaining, more gaming. I'll keep an eye out for Tina. You go and have some real fun. Alright, love? The game, which we call the Mantle game for simplicity, is the base for Tina's game boards. He grabbed the original game and modified it to make it something new. He made a room hack. And room hacks are quite literally reinterpretations of existing games. The entirety of Tina's game boards are reinterpretations. But here it's where it gets even more interesting. When playing the Mantle game, you can break through the intended path using the sword that doesn't exist in Tina's version. With the sword, you can kill enemies that will only attack you if you attack them first. And each time you kill them, you get experience so you can level up and become stronger. The stronger you are, the more you can explore. And after getting max level, you can start destroying the trees that limit the area of the game. And if you go through the forest long enough, you will find the Ice Key. If you also earn a T rank or a C rank in the second board, you can access the second Mantle game, where after getting the level 2 from killing all monsters in the main area, you can go into the little boat and navigate towards the top of the map to find an icy door where you can put the Ice Key and open it. Inside the Ice Palace, you can find more enemies to kill. Exploring a bit, you can find a room that says, "Follow the White Cloak," and another one that says, "The Forbidden Path starts with Ice Magic." And after killing all the enemies in the area, you can break some orange trees and find a white-cloaked person who resembles no else that world design. With her, you can shoot ice magic that freezes all enemies it hits. And with her, you can freeze a very familiar-looking bluebird. Then, you enter a maze where you need to follow Noel's character to get to the end, until you find a suspicious looking door with red horns as a frame, and after interacting with it, it will trigger a scene where the Ice Key is used up, and she was used up. When we get back to the green room after an altercation with Tina, we can go back to the S room and find Ram half turned to stone, still attaching to their purpose in this world, and right behind them is a last Mantle minigame. The game starts with Chris, Susie and Rolsey in an unused city, a city that has some sections that look suspiciously like some of the rooms in the cyber world. After getting the sword, you'll notice that there's no enemies to kill. Well, except for two, technically, Susie and Rolsey. When you kill them, Chris will stop looking at the screen for a moment to avoid looking at themselves killing their friends. This automatically puts you at level 3 and allows you to break tiles of the map, which gives you access to a long corridor that leads to a manhole. Entering it leads you to another section where you have to once again kill all the enemies inside. This area, as a lot of fans have pointed out, feels like a direct reference to the genocide route in Undertale, but as GoldPro explains in his Root Theory video, which is highly recommended by the way, this area could easily be an interpretation of Hometown's map, implying that these enemies represent monsters from the light world. After killing each enemy in the area, you can break another set of orange trees and continue into another long corridor where you can find Tina talking about what happened between him and Spamton and his deal with Chris to keep the fun gang distracted. And right after killing him, as if he was just another enemy, you can continue and find the shelter door. Entering it leads you to the fight with Iram. The sword route is probably the most interesting part of Chapter 3, as a lot of people has pointed out, relates and shows a tutorial for the weird route. It's not perfect and it doesn't go in the correct order, but it's obviously referring to the weird route, with Noelle as the white cloak and her ice magic being the key to freezing Burley and starting the weird route. We were here not to talk about what this could mean for the future of the weird route. I recommend watching the Roots Theory by GoldPro for that. But I'm here to talk about the thematic connection between the Mantle minigame and the larger theme of Reinterpretation. As I said before, this route is obviously showing the weird route. It shows you how to start and continue the weird route, but it's not 100% accurate. The sequence of events is not accurate to the sequence of events that actually happened. We can have Noelle on our party in this area of Cyberworld, and after that is when we kill Burley. But in the Mantle minigame, first we kill Burley, and then we get to the area where Noelle joins the fun gang. So the Mantle minigame is 100% true to what happens in the weird route, but it's not 100% accurate on how it will happen. The sequence of events is different, but it's true if we decide to go with the weird route. And the sword route is another example of reinterpretation being a part of Deltarune's themes. This entire minigame is a reinterpretation of how the weird route plays out. And this game gets reinterpreted by Tina to create the board minigame for the chapter. It's a perfect example of reinterpretation being an important part of Deltarune. The entire sword route is about reinterpretation, but I still have way more to say about the weird route, so let's leave it here for now. It's implied that Chris already played the Mantle minigame before, and it's also implied that this is a real video game in the light world, probably this universe version of Zelda. But it's not only the only piece of universe media that is important to Deltarune's larger narrative. And I think the most important one is The Lord of the Hammer. Lord of the Hammer is an in-universe book series that, other than being an obvious reference to The Lord of the Rings, is really popular in the light world. Lord of the Hammer was written by a famous historian, priest and writer Gerson Boom, and it was a book series heavily inspired by the Deltarune prophecy, to the point where the 5 chapters that exist of Lord of the Hammer correspond to the first chapter of Deltarune, those being Chapter 1, The March of the Dark King, being Chapter 1, The Beginning on Deltarune, Chapter 2, The City of the Shining, being Chapter 2, A Cyber's World, Chapter 3, The Isles of Northern Light, being Chapter 3, Late Night, Chapter 4, The Trial of the Holy Hammer, Chapter 4, the prophecy. And lastly, Chapter 5 being the field of being a gold relating to Chapter 5, which we still don't know the name yet. The events of these chapters appear to be a one-to-one with the events of the chapters of Deltarune so far. In the March of the Dark King, the heroes defeat the king and stop the dragon, like we do in Chapter 1, when we stop Susie and defeat Spade King. In the City of the Shining, the heroes battle on chariots to save the queen. We don't really save the queen, but we do in fact ride cars, and we do save the Queen Noel holiday, so I guess it counts. In the Isles of Northernlight, the heroes catch a glimpse of a lost land, and we do in fact catch a glimpse of a lost land during Tena's second game board. And lastly, Chapter 4 being a great smith gives the heroes a terrible weapon, and in Chapter 4, Gerson gave Susie the axe of justice. It's also safe to assume this trend will continue with Chapter 5, but why is there only 5 chapters of Lord of the Hammer if there are 2 more chapters of Deltarune? As Gerson himself tells Susie during his secret fight on Chapter 4, Gerson only wrote up to Chapter 5 of its books, and then he couldn't continue. We are not sure why he couldn't continue, or if he did it on purpose, or if he couldn't finish it because he died, but he said that the story became so grand and overwhelming that some people thought that the author was swallowed by his own creation. And he also mentions that he wanted for the youth to keep creating the following pages, the following chapters, but they never did. Now, I would like to talk about how Gerson literally did what I said early in this video. My idea of using the prophecy panels as an artistic prompt to write your own story was literally what Gerson did to write The Lord of the Hammer. For example, he used the panel Queen's Chariot Cannot Be Stopped and interpreted it as a story where the heroes fight in chariots to save the queen. And because the rest of the chapters are so weird to what happens in Deltarune, it's easy to imagine that he uses the known panels and panels we consider in Chapter 4 to create the story of Lord of the Hammer, making Lord of the Hammer a reinterpretation of the Deltarune prophecy, in the exact way I propose it could be done early in the video, but I haven't finished talking about Lord of the Hammer. Gerson's son and the absolute worst knight candidate ever, Alvin Bloom, told us about his father. These books became really popular. So popular in fact that someone made an adaptation of this book series as an RPG. And as Susie mentions after winning her fight with Gerson, the book series was adapted into an RPG named Dragon Blazers. For talking about Dragon Blazers, I want you all to know the definition of adaptation. Adaptation is to make something suitable for a new use or purpose. This means that they grab the original book series and modify it to be suitable as a video game. The result is Noel's favorite RPG, a game where the player can access a nice balance like the one we could do in the Sword Route, and also has a secret evil route as mentioned by Noel during the Holiday Manor segment in Chapter 4. I played too with my dad, there was this evil route my parents didn't know about. I always played it in secret so they wouldn't take it away. Dude, I think I did that by accident. You did the evil route by accident? Yeah, I didn't know you could be nice. So I was just killing everything and getting pissed. Why the hell is everyone mad? Pretty sure I'd do it in a good way now though. Maybe. Gosh, I'd love to see you play it for real. Well, if you got another copy, just leave it in the lost and found, I guess. Maybe I will. In this dialogue, it's implied that Dragon Blazers was also a franchise and not just a one game, having at least 2 sequels, Dragon Blazers 2 and Dragon Blazers 3. Noel explains that in Dragon Blazers 2, there's a secret evil route, and Susie asks that she played the evil route by accident. This is an obvious reference to the genocide route in Undertale, and how some people play it in their first playthrough by accident. But this could also be a reference to the weird route here in Deltarune. Interestingly enough, the weird route happens during Chapter 2 of Deltarune, and this evil route also happens in the second entry of their franchise. But do you remember the inconsistency I mentioned when I was talking about the sword route? I mentioned that fighting the bird and freezing it happens during the second Mantle minigame, but the area where we find Noel in Chapter 2 appears to happen during the third Mantle segment. I call this an inconsistency because in the weird route we find Noel first and then we freeze Pearly. But connecting the evil route from Dragon Blazers with the weird route, we create a very interesting possibility where the Mantle minigame is actually Dragon Blazers. Because in the Spamton sweepstakes, in Noel's blog, she talks about how in Dragon Blazers there is a cross-shaped maze in the ice area, where once you go in it, no matter where you go, you'll always be brought back to the same room. She also mentions that normally one of the characters is supposed to guide you through the maze, but it became one of the most infamous parts of the game because if you go out there without that character, you'll get basically stuck forever. This is a word-by-word area from the second Mantle minigame. An area where there is a cross-shaped maze and no matter where you go you get stuck forever, but the white cloak character can guide you through the maze. Those two are identical, to the point I genuinely believe that the sword route is Dragon Blazers, and that's not all of the similarities. In the blog, Noel continues saying that by trying all of the possible directions, somehow you can go through a corridor going up to a door that doesn't appear anywhere else in the game. Sadly, Noel couldn't go through the door because she got so scared that she accidentally unplugged the console. But this happens in the second Mantle minigame as well. When we follow the white cloak, who is meant to represent Noel, she guides us through a corridor going to a door that doesn't appear anywhere else in the game, and that door is where we first meet Iram. I wondered what would Noel see if she entered that room. This info about the first Dragon Blazers and what Noel said about the evil route in Dragon Blazers 2 makes me believe that the sword route is a tutorial for the weird route, but in universe is the literal Dragon Blazers game. That's why it's so different to what actually happens during the weird route, because it's just an adaptation of a book inspired by the prophecy, so it couldn't be accurate to the real sequence of events. But going back to the origin of Dragon Blazers is an adaptation for something else. In this case, a video game adaptation. And adaptations are literally reinterpretations of a piece of media to make it something different. Dragon Blazers is a reinterpretation of The Lord of the Hammer, which is also a reinterpretation of the prophecy. See what I mean with Deltarune being about reinterpretation? And it's not only this, but there is also more to talk about. Cat Pedders is a pet simulator that is obviously a parody to cats. A real-life pet simulator where the animals are modeled out of circles to sell the illusion of 3D. Noel is a fan of this game, and there are multiple pages about this game in her blog. In deltarune.com/catpedders/ Noel mentions how one of her favorite video games is Cat Pedders 2, and how fascinating it's the complex breeding system. Yet she also warns us that if we use mods to modify pets and they breed together, we might get an abomination, or worse, the game will freeze and glitch. Side note, Noel would 100% love Mugenics. She would have thousands of hours on Mugenics, I just know that. Under this page, there is a link that goes to /egg, where Noel talks about how when she was trying to get a super rare pet, I guess it's like her equivalent of shiny hunting, a weird egg appeared. This egg came with the message saying, "Special." This was something she never heard about, and she was excited to be the first person to discover a new cat in the game. Yet, this egg never hatched. She tried to delete it, cause she thought it might be a glitch, yet it couldn't be deleted, and only kept doing a weird sound she found scary. But after realizing that it might not do anything, she decided to treat it with love, and took care of it as if it was a normal pet. She was happy and thought about maybe applying the egg to the internet as a mod, but the next day, when she opened the game, the egg was gone due to happiness. She makes the point that pets normally only live due to sadness, which makes the egg even more weird. But not only that, she mentions that the egg had a name, but she can't remember what it was. I think the /egg site is trying to tell us something about the eggs and the egg room, as if the name wasn't obvious. But the question is, what is it trying to tell us? I think it's that the eggs are not related to darkness or light at all. They are completely outside of the duality of the universe. If you get the chapter 1 egg, the Forbidden Man will appear in a car close to dying in the start of chapter 2, which implies that the Forgotten Man is a liner. But if the eggs are objects from the light world, wouldn't that mean that the eggs would manifest as darkners or as a magical item? I think this page gives us an answer. They wouldn't transform because they are not objects from a light world either. They can appear in a video game from Noel. No matter how hard you try to remove it from your inventory, it won't leave, and they will disappear at the end of each chapter, implying that somehow those eggs are completely different from anything else we know in the game. They are outside of the limits of the light world and dark world. Okay, but we're not here to talk about the eggs, even though I just spent a good bit talking about them. We're interested in the text post about cat feathers in deltarune.com/rain. In this blog, Noel tells us about a rainy day where she asks Cathy to come hang out with her to play cat feathers, because her mom decided to cancel school because of the rain. Then she talks about how much she likes to play cat feathers on a rainy day, especially the minigames, one of them being called Jungler. Yes, Jungler, like the cowboy Mike Jungler from the Micron Jungler. This let us know that the names of the minigames are canon minigames in Cat Feathers games, and that becomes way more evident the further we go in the blog. She mentions that she was very into a minigame with a name she doesn't remember. Yet she mentions how it's like an endless cave where you must grab cats of different varieties to get more points. She made a text file named B, where she typed how rare she thought each cat was. If you didn't pick it up by now, the B stands for Patat, the minigame from the beeping mic. Her description of the game is a one-to-one with how the minigame actually plays. So that's 2 out of 3 minigames being related with cat feathers. It's safe to assume all 3 of them are minigames from cat feathers, which makes the next part extremely suspicious. When listening to the rarity of each cat, she mentions that once found another cat she never listed before. But this cat, instead of raising your points, it lowered them. That she lost immediately, so she couldn't take a picture of it. This is suspicious because when we play Patat, we actually find a creature that lowers our points. This creature being Image Friend. This for me confirms the popular theory that Image Friend is a cat, but also validates the idea of Mike being Image Friend, which is a whole can of worms of its own. So we are not gonna talk about that right now. If you haven't noticed, I really have a lot to say about this video game. Another can of worms that I would like to briefly mention is that she says that she believes another person has actually seen the point lowering cat, but if she asks them, they wouldn't give her a straight answer. I, like many other fans, believe this is referring to Chris. Now we get to the important part of the vlog for this video. Noel mentions that Patat the minigame appears in a Cat Feathers the RPG game. And then she says explicitly that Cat Feathers the RPG is a ripoff of Dragon Blazers. So we now know that Patat, a minigame that is important for Noel and probably Chris, which has Image Frame in it and for some reason has the freedom motif in the background, appears in a game which is a ripoff of a game that was inspired by a book series that was inspired by The Prophecy. That's what I mean about Deltarune being about interpretation. Gerson reinterpreted The Prophecy as a book series that was reinterpreted as a video game but was later reinterpreted as a reinterpretation of a pet simulator game. Prophecy, Lord of the Hammer, Dragon Blazers, and Cat Feathers are so important to the game's lore and narrative and all come from the same place. They all are reinterpretations of each other, and that makes their connection with the main story so much more important. Image's friend appears in Cat Feathers, and the sorrow is Dragon Blazers. Gerson talks about Lord of the Hammer during his fight, and the prophecy is the main threat that our gang has to confront. And all of them are the same panels that we see during Chapter 4 reinterpreted over and over again. And if I could bet on something that I think would happen in the next chapters, is that somehow they're going to explain that Blood Crushers, a fictional horror movie franchise that Noel and Susie are fans of, is somehow also a reinterpretation of the prophecy. And there, for Raise Up Your Band, the song that is most related to this, which was written by Blood Crushers the band, a band inspired by Blood Crushers the movie, would also be a reinterpretation of the prophecy. And I know this is going to happen because Raise Up Your Band lyrics talk about a darkness and how our heart will shine us the way, which is literally how we close dark fountains in game. I'd bet everything I have on this. That is no way this isn't intended. I think Raise Up Your Band is an reinterpretation of the prophecy as well. Now that I took all of that out of my system, with how important these pieces of ingenious media are for the story of Deltarune, to the point that they are talked about constantly during the game, and with how much they relate to the prophecy, impossible to ignore the fact that the game also insists that those are adaptations, reimaginations, or spin-offs. I think it's important because that's what the prophecy is. As I established before, the prophecy by its own logic is up to interpretation. If the game keeps giving us reinterpretations of the prophecy that are important to the story, then I think the answer is very clear. Deltarune is about reinterpretation, and reinterpretation is the only way we have to actually subvert the prophecy. But that's not the only reason why these pieces of universe media are important. You ever wonder why Toby Fox decided to make a game drop in chapters? Like, surely Undertale won him enough money to pay for a team and to drop Deltarune as a full game eventually. So why did he make it in chapters? While you think about that, take this into consideration. Why did Toby make the 3 different mics? Why did he go through all the trouble of finding an entire sub-area, 5 boss, and 3 different minigames just to make a silly joke about all your theories are wrong, goodbye? I don't think it was for that. I don't think so, because I've been hiding another piece of evidence on my Deltarune is about interpretation theory for you, that being the existence of Bandar Jungler and Pluie. During the pre-Spamton sweepstakes era, one of the most important points of discussion was who was Mike. Mike was mentioned for the first time by Spamton when we talked to him on his shop. To that point, we didn't know anything about who or what Mike was. What we assumed it was probably part of Chapter 3, considering that Jevil also mentioned Queen in Chapter 1, so we assumed that the pattern would follow, and that Spamton mentioning Mike implies that Mike was important to Chapter 3, and we also thought that because Mike could also be referring to a microphone, and therefore it would be like a TV host. Reminded that in that time we didn't know anything about Tina, so we thought that Mike would be the main boss of Chapter 3. Of course, we know that's not the case anymore. Then, the most important time of Deltarune history happened. The first Spamton sweepstakes drop. We already talked about some of the stuff in there, but now we are going to talk about Spamton's dialogue in this page. It has a lot of interesting dialogue and lore bits. But here's where we learn about Tina for the first time. Because of this revelation, most of us assume that Tina was the main boss of Chapter 3, because Tina could be short for antenna. This, as we know, ended up being half-truth. It ended up being short for Antenna, which is an incredible name by the way. So the question went back to who is Mike? Most of us thought, well, if Tenna is the main boss, then Mike must be like a secondary character. Some of us even thought that he could be the secret boss of chapter 3, and some dialogue implied that Spamton has a good relationship with this Mike, where this being the perfect ingredients for the first Phantom Mike ever. This Mike was the first one people design original versions of him being a darkner inspired by a microphone, with the personality of a TV host and with a big white smile. Doesn't that sound really like Motormouth Mike? Keep that in mind. Then disaster struck. The Antichrist of the Deltarune world arrived to send chaos to the land. The video that rooted everyone's brain into Deltarune's oblivion. SpookyDood's Woody theory. I would like for all of you to watch this video. It's a beautiful and horrifying part of our fandom's history, but as a quick summary, the theory uses Toby Fox's weird fixation for making remixes of You Have a Friend in Me from Toy Story and the newsletters that talk about the cancelled cowboy segment from Chapter 3 to prove that the secret boss of Chapter 3 would be a Woody-inspired cowboy toy with a speaker being a reference to Toby's remix Friend Inside Me, and a parallel to Grace with us inside of them. This, as you probably know if you are watching this video, became one of the most popular memes of the fandom, and it became the next Phantom Mike, Cowboy Mike, exactly like Jungler. Lastly, in between all of this, people also made another theory. Before fighting Spamton Neo in Queen's basement, you can backtrack in one of the rooms and see this mysterious pink and yellow-eyed smiling friend. People found out that his sprite was called the Vice Friend, and we started calling him that. But then someone made the connection between Mike and the Vice Friend. Spamton has glasses that have the same color as the Vice Friend eyes, and it appears close where Spamton would transform into Spamton Neo. People found this really suspicious, so they started to think that the Vice Friend might actually be Mike, and they started to make art of the Vice Friend as Mike. Later, the second coming Spamton happened, and with it came the connection between the Vice Friend and cats. This is not actually the first time Friend was some way related to cats. I don't know if anyone ever mentioned this, but Spamton glasses are pink and yellow, while the Vice Friends are yellow and pink. The colors are reversed, and Spamton, while talking about elemental pairs, a hidden mechanic in Deltarune, he mentions that puppet element was paired with the cat element. So if the puppet Spamton is mirroring the Vice Friend, then it would make sense that Friend is a cat. Anyway, during the second week of the Spamton's mistakes, we got a really simplified version of Bad Dad's minigame. And in this minigame, there is a chance of the Vice Friend showing up, this being solid proof of the Vice Friend being a cat. Its relation with Spamton gave birth to the last big Phantom Mike, Cat Mike. Like Bluey. See what I'm trying to say? Its Mike is a reference to each of the biggest versions of Mike the fandom created, and this is important because the only reason we managed to create those Phantom Mikes was because Deltarune is coming out in chapters. If the game was to come out in full, then there wouldn't be any Phantom versions of Mike to inspire the 3 fake Mikes from the game. That's literally what I was talking about before. And the artist and theory writer made their own version of Mike using the same base as everyone else, like an artistic prompt, and this created multiple versions of Mike that then Toby used to create his own version of fake Mikes. That's exactly what happened with Lord of the Hammer, Dragon Blazers, and Cat Pedro's RPG. These Mikes are reinterpretations of the Phantom Mikes that are in fact reinterpretations of what we knew of Mike before. And that's not it. This happened with December holiday. Everyone, including myself, has made their own version of December based on how they think December would look like. And something tells me this is happening by design. Toby wanted this to happen. Remember those crazy 24 hours where people were crazy creating and making art of a random blob chart because Toby Fox said Bluey once. That's exactly what he wanted to happen. He gave us a name and we made the face of this character. We created our own Bluey. It's literally the same concept. I have been ranting about this video, using the same thing to create something different, as with the hypothetical experiment of using Deltarune's prophecy panels as an artistic prompt, or creating new books or games all based upon the same thing. Everything about this game is about reinterpretation, or ability to create new and fantastic things from something that already exists, and to rescue new meaning from something that might have a different meaning originally. Reinterpretation. Toby has talked about this in the past. He mentioned that the characters being drawn in such a small pixel art style was supposed to leave their design up to interpretation, and that's how we got Sans pink slippers and Undyne white heart in her chest. Those were all our interpretations of their sprites, and the most important thing he said about this was the ending monologue of Deltarune 10th anniversary.
About the new areas, it's basically just a what if. But this what if was always there. It never wasn't there and it will never not be there. Every monster has to have a place to go home to. Every monster has to have friends, they have to something to eat, somewhere to go hang out. The underground is a wide place. The only limit to all of this is your imagination. My goal with these days wasn't to show you a new hidden truth you will never be able to access. My goal is to remind you that you have always been able to go, if you just hold the key of asking what's there. What's under the bridge? What's beyond the horizon? Maybe you guys feel only my answer to these questions counts or matters. But to me I only feel the opposite. This is just one interpretation. The underground is as big as you want it to be. And I invite you to come behind the wall with me.
He directly says everything I have been ranting about, or opinion, or points of view, or interpretation matters for these games. Matters because the games are as big as we imagine, and that's as important as the original story. And I think this is the reason why Deltarune is coming in chapters. Deltarune and Toby are asking us to make our own interpretations of the story, to tell our own stories, to make our own characters, or to expand the characters we already have. And we have been doing this since the first chapter ever released. All our theories, or music, or art, all of it's the same as the Lord of the Hammer, the same as a Dragon Blazers, the same as each of the mics. It is a reinterpretation of Deltarune. And all of this is as important to Deltarune as Deltarune itself. Deltarune is about reinterpretation. Now we can talk about the future of Deltarune's story and what it has to do with interpretation. After all, I did mention that this was the only way we can subvert prophecy. The reason why I think that is because of everything we already discussed. And if Deltarune is thematically about reinterpretation, then maybe it could be literally about it as well. And if that is the case, and with what we already established, maybe we can reinterpret the prophecy as something that benefits us. Whatever the last prophecy is, it might be something vague enough to the point we might be able to avoid the prophecy's fate. Whatever the last prophecy is, it might be something vague enough to the point we might be able to avoid it. But for us to think in a way to subvert this prophecy, we first need to know what the prophecy even says. And I think I have the answer. Before talking about the prophecy, I would ask nicely of you to watch SpookyDood's Channel Cage theory. We both basically got to the same conclusion for the different reasons, but I still want you to give them credit because their theory can be kind of used as evidence for mine. So please, before continuing, go watch that video. The link is in the description. For the people that already watched the video, you probably already know what I think the verse will be.
the cage will die or be killed. I personally think that this is why Susie reacted so badly to the prophecy, and it makes sense with her dialogue about it after breaking the panel. If the prophecy is the girl will shatter the cage, then everything would make sense story-wise. But it would also make sense in the context of this theory. But before that, I'll talk about how I got to that conclusion in the first place. One of the most important parts of Deltarune's narrative is the separation of the player character and the player. This theme being depicted with a relationship with Chris. Neither of us knows the intention of the other. Chris doesn't know what we want from them or from the world of Deltarune, and we don't know what Chris needs from us and their relationship with the Knight and Carl. Us and Chris are antagonistic of each other, despite the merit of not knowing what the other wants. And then if we did, we would probably still be antagonistic to Chris. They are doing something that requires them to sacrifice their own agency, free will and well-being, and literally requires them to sacrifice undying for who knows what reason. This is because of a promise Chris made with Carol Holiday, implying that Carol is using Chris for her own goals. Goals that Chris probably agrees with. Now, even if I would like to talk about the evil group chat team or what I think they want with all of this, that's not the point of this video. What I want to focus on is what Chris agreed to do. As I established before, Chris agreed to sacrifice a lot of themselves. But let's be more specific. Chris agreed to be possessed and controlled by us, a creature only comparable to an eldritch being from Chris' perspective. A creature that knows more than it should and has complete power over themselves and their friends. This put them in a lot of danger. Nothing is stopping this creature from hurting their friends and family. Of course, we can't really do that unless we go out of our way to do the weird road, but Chris most likely doesn't know this. After all, they put us in a cage constantly to make sure we don't do anything. Why would Chris agree to do this is not something we can answer just yet, but it probably has to do with something that happened to December Holiday because of the many times Chris is impaired to know about what happened, especially with the repressed memories about what's behind 3. And if Chris feels the need to sacrifice so much for a promise they made to Carl, then Chris definitely has some heavy guilt relating to December's disappearance. That's the most probable reason why they would accept something like this. But our power over Chris isn't the only thing that puts Chris in danger. For what it has been shown during the chapter 4 Holiday's Manor scene, Chris appears to need the soul, not only because Carol literally says it, because they seem weak when they don't have the soul, and they have backlash from taking it out once and putting it back on. So their health is probably also at risk, and the most important thing that Chris is sacrificing is their relationships with everyone else. They have 2 special connections with the cast of Deltarune, their relationship with Noel Holiday and Susie. And these relationships are completely hijacked by the soul, to the point that the mental image of Chris is deeply different between Susie and Noel. Let's talk about it. Noel has been Chris's friend since ever, and even after so many years of being apart from each other, Noel still enjoys their company and sees them as something special for herself. She mentions how Chris is the only person who knows how weird Noel really is, and how comforting it is for her hearing Chris saying that they're friends. There are even some romantic implications in the relationship. Noel and Chris have been the Ferris wheel together, and as we all know, Ferris wheels are romantic in Noel's eyes. She did mention that it was kind of forced, but there is a decent chance that the reason why Chris and Noel rode the Ferris wheel together was because of their parents. Yet Noel doesn't know how she felt about it. She talks about how Chris shook the Ferris wheel car to scare Noel, and then they would look at her and smile, probably hoping for a reaction from her. And when Susie asked her how did she feel in that moment, she said that she doesn't remember. When I said that the relationship has some sort of romantic implications, I don't mean as in Chris and Noel like each other. I do think that, but that's my cheaper Miss talking about, not the theorist Mist. I mean it as in the relationship had romance imprinted on them. As I mentioned before, Chris and Noel rode the Ferris wheel by force, probably because of their parents, implying that at least one of them wants them to be closer together. And of course, the weirdo has this heteronormative relationship themes with Chris and Noel. Ares increases gender identity and Noel's agency to put them in a romantic situation against their will. But the point here is, Noel and Chris have a deep bond. They feel comfortable around each other, even if they don't want to admit it. Noel especially yearns for Chris, constantly talking about good memories with Chris, even if in the moment she was scared or sad. To Noel, those are happy memories she shares with Chris, memories she wants to go back to. Then, Susie, the best character in video game history. She has a rough start with Chris. She would relentlessly bully them, and we know why. She puts on this tough girl mask to avoid being hurt by anyone else. As I mentioned earlier in this video, Susie has a lot of trauma relating to mistreatment she has endured in her past. Town to town, by the time she got to hometown, her mask was her one and only way to interact with the real world. And then she met Chris. Chris is fascinated by Susie. For what we know from Noel's blog, deltarunes.com/the newest girl, Chris seems to like Susie even when Susie was bullying them. They seem to want to joke with her. It might be blissful ignorance, but Noel implies that it's pretty obvious that Susie bullies Chris. Yet with the dialogue of Monster Thing, she never really hurt anyone. And considering what we already know, it really doesn't make sense for Susie to want to bully Chris. Her bully persona was made as a shield against abuse, not as a way to feel powerful over others. So she bullying Chris on purpose doesn't make a lot of sense, especially when she said Chris that their mother would be happier without them. This said something back to her, and she backed off and left without saying anything. It's implied by the blog that what Chris said made Susie uncomfortable, but my opinion is that they said I know or I hope so, because Susie said that someone would make them disappear and they already have a tendency of self-sacrifice and implied self-harm. So in their head, if Toriel would be happier if they disappeared, then they should disappear. This also could be the case because they know something will happen to them, because of whatever they're planning with the Knight and Carol. But whatever Chris said to Susie made her uncomfortable, and probably made her realize that saying stuff like that is going too far. Normally a bully wouldn't really care about that, but she did because she isn't trying to actually hurt them, because she isn't trying to bully them. She is trying to get them to leave her alone. Chris is heavily implied to be the only one trying to get close to Susie. After all, Noel mentioned that Susie only bullies Chris, and Susie doesn't even bully Noel. Devastatingly for Noel, I need Susie to shove me into a locker and call me pathetic holiday. And Noel even offered to change seats with Chris, but Chris didn't want to, and even Noel found that really weird. What I'm saying is that Chris had a liking for Susie even from before the story, and that is heavily shown in the last few chapters. They shared a ritual they had with their brother Asriel, where they would go to eat at QC's after church and draw in the windows using their bread. This ritual being so important to Chris that makes them feel sad when they receive hot chocolate from QC's in an early chapter. And they have constantly gone against their will to protect Susie from attacks 2 times now, one against King and the other one against Gerson's statue. They have also shown interest in bringing her to the festival instead of Ralsei and Noel when asked by Susie. All of this is to say that Noel and Susie are important people for Chris. Chris would risk themselves and do anything to protect them. Chris literally does in a few parts of the game so far, and both deep, meaningful connections are being tainted by our hands. During the closet scene where our favorite non-binary person is trying to hit God with a hockey stick and actually succeeds, Noel and Susie are talking about Chris, and Noel brings up her dream, this dream being Cyberwolf, and she mentions how Chris was weird, and how everything they said sounded like if they were on a speaker, and then Susie replies, "That sounds like normal Chris to me." This is such an interesting piece of dialogue. Noel knows something is weird with Chris. That weird is us, the player. that is controlling them and telling them what to say and do. While Susie doesn't realize that Chris is acting weird. For her, the Chris being controlled is the normal Chris. This is such a different perspective of Chris that both of them have, and it's important because this is a consequence of Chris's sacrifice. Imagine you are Chris, right? And through everything that has happened, you deeply care about your friend Noelle, and you've been trying your best to make up for whatever happened years ago. Yet you can't reconnect with her because the only way to make things better is to sacrifice yourself. And then this new girl Susie comes along and you immediately want to become her friend. You try your best to get close, but it only appears to put her away more and more. But then the plan starts and your body is now in control of something else. Someone else. And this being outside of your understanding tries its best to live your life. And they do a better job of being you than yourself. Imagine how horrible it would feel for Chris that we are reconnecting with Noelle, yet she realizes that something is wrong even if it's making them reconnect. And then you hear Susie say that the version of you that is being controlled and used by something else is the normal you. And you realize that Susie only knows the fake you. That the fake you are Susie's friend and you aren't, and no one else knows it. Wouldn't that be heartbreaking? Wouldn't that be a nightmare scenario? This is what I mean with Chris sacrificing their relationships with Noelle and Susie. They are losing Noelle because she feels like Chris isn't them anymore, and they feel like they lost Susie because it's us who are befriending her, not them. And yet they still go through the plan. Maybe because they can't turn back anymore, or maybe because they can, or maybe because they feel like they have no choice. But they keep going fully knowing that they will lose both of them the moment they realize what's going on. Of course we know that's not true. Susie and Noelle both care deeply about Chris. Noelle wouldn't abandon them at all. She would be relieved to know that Chris is still Chris. And Susie, even if at first she wouldn't take it well, it wouldn't be because she doesn't care about Chris. It would be because she thinks Chris didn't actually care about her. And it was the soul who made them be friends. It's heavily implied that they made the decision to separate themselves on purpose because of what happened in their past. Yet they still care deeply about both of them and yearn to be with them, to actually be with them without her intervention. Now, why did I talk about all of this? Because I want you all to understand that Chris Dreamer is sacrificing all of this on purpose. Yes, Carol probably had a lot of influence on the idea, but Chris promised that with the plan, fully knowing that they would risk themselves and others for the reason we don't fully understand yet. But we do know that it's something they feel guilty towards, something that makes them feel that they have to sacrifice themselves, and at its worth, the pain and suffering it causes them. And this is important because I want to argue that Chris is the second voice on the gunner maker scene. I think Chris chose to have us controlling them. I don't think it was Carol or Friend or the night or whatever you think it was. I think it was Chris. And we know that Chris and Kathy have talked about the cult stuff. And one of the pop-up dialogues that Chris has done in chapter 2 mentions that they click on a demon summoning classes for teens. And one of the history items of the room on Queen's Mansion is them searching for how to use magic. This makes the occult and demon summoning a part of Chris's characterization, especially with their connection with the red horns that they use as a child. Red horns that can look like devil horns. This with the random ass birdcage in their room with a blood stain just by its side gives their whole deal some occult vibe that could easily justify our connection with them. In the maker sequence, Chris would connect to us and force us to control them. And I would like to clarify that yes, the soul is heavily compared to angels, so why would it be a demon or something that requires summoning? But what is a demon if not an angel that fell to earth? Satan was an angel that fell to earth. And technically speaking, we are an angel from this plane of reality that fell into Deltarune. In a way. A bit convoluted, but you see what I mean, right? It would make sense that Chris would summon us as the demon of a summoning, and then use us to control them to do whatever the fuck they want from us to do. What I'm saying is, Chris made a deal with the devil. They gave their soul to the devil, and we are the result of that. Therefore, Chris is a warlock. But that's not the point. The point is that if we believe that Chris chooses to have us possessing them, to have our power to close fountains, then Chris' theme of sacrifice has been essential since before chapter 1. And I think that's gonna continue throughout the story. Chris will continue to sacrifice themselves the same way they have been doing since the start, either because of their deal with Carol or from their guilt towards whatever happened in December. And considering one of the most important things they are sacrificing by making this deal is their friendship with Susie and Noel, makes sense that when they have the chance to do something by themselves, they decide to get away from both Susie and Noel, even if both of them want Chris to be closer to them. With Chris being thematically related to sacrifice, and the evil three of them disappearing when looking into a shadow crystal in chapter 1, and with the secret 1225 area in chapter 3, and the relationship with the Forgotten Man, put Chris into the most plausible character to be related to the last tragedy of the prophecy. Again, as SpookyDood said in his video about the last prophecy, the girl will shatter the gates. It's probably very accurate. Imagine the situation. During chapter 6 or 7, Susie and Noel, either from Chris themselves or from Noel's suspicions, realize that it's being controlled by something else, and when confronted, Chris doesn't say anything, or retracts to their evil team, or they just stop helping, or whatever is happening. Chris is going to try to do what they were supposed to do in the first place. Right now, the world is at stake. The roaring is starting, and without the soul, Susie and the rest of the gang can't really seal the fountain. And the one who should know more about it and is able to close them doesn't want to help, either because of their own free will or because of external powers at hand like Carol or the Roaring Knight. They simply don't help at all. And Susie, frustrated from all the lies that Ralsei and Chris have been telling her, realizes that the last prophecy was talking about this moment, and she realizes what she has to do. She will probably be not into the idea of doing so, because she really appreciates Chris, but for her, there's literally no other option. I don't think it's gonna be literally like this, but I do think that Susie's and Chris' conflict relating to the soul will connect to Chris sacrificing themselves. After all, Susie needs the soul to be able to close the fountain, because to save the world there's only one way. The girl must shatter the case. Only then will the world be saved. I believe that Chris will be the sacrifice to save the world, and or to save Des. Chris being the one who dies to accomplish the prophecy isn't a new theory at all. A ton of people have thought of this, but not a lot of people have shared ideas on how it's gonna happen, and if there will be a way to avoid such an ending. So I will share my idea on how that's gonna happen and how to avoid it. After that, that's basically the theory. But first let's talk about the shadow crystals. There's been a lot of debate over what the shadow crystals even do. Some say they show the future or the past, that they reveal the dark worlds are fake and that's why Jael and Spampton went crazy, or that Deltarune is a game, but I don't agree with anything like that. I personally think that they don't show anything of the sorts. I think they show the prophecy. Specifically, other ways the prophecy can go true, or to say it in a simpler way, the shadow crystal shows different iterations of the prophecy, at least inside the light world. Inside the dark world, they appear to show the light world, but even then, it's always relating to the prophecy in some way. For example, while looking through the shadow crystal in a dark world, you see the respective light world counterpart. Toys on the floor while on Card Kingdom, and the computer lab while in Cyber City. Those are the main areas from Deltarune, obviously, but they are also the areas that Gerson presumably also used for the Lord of the Hammer books, the City of the Shining being Cyberworld as an example. Those are areas that we might not see in the prophecy,
but they seem consistent in all of the media inspired from the prophecy. So it's safe to say that those places come from different prophecy panels that we didn't see during chapter 4. But the most important example for this argument are the one dialogue when watching through the piece right after your fight with Tina. You held the crystal up to your eye, from some strange reason, just for a brief moment. You thought you saw the television getting smashed into pieces. This dialogue is referring to the knight smashing the TV in the light world, in the same way it happened in the dark world. And as we already talked about, the Lord of Screens clave blade by blade is a prophecy panel. It's something that the prophecy already depicted and is shown to us through the shadow crystal. And this is especially interesting because that wasn't the dialogue originally. It went like this. You held the crystal up to your eye. From some strange reason, for just a brief moment, you thought you saw undying frozen in ice. Undying frozen in ice is such an interesting dialogue that, for what we know, doesn't really break the logic of the shadow crystals. It was showing what probably happened in the light world. With Tess being the knight, it would make sense that Undying would be in a similar setup early after Snowgrave, or something similar because Tess has a relationship with the rest of the Holy family and all of them have ice motive. Tess freezing her, so it would be easier to move her after leaving the dark world or whatever would make sense. So why was it changed? Because it doesn't follow the rules of the shadow crystals. Firstly, we don't see Tess freezing the night. We see the knight kidnapped Undying. She being frozen might still be a thing, but it's not something we can see. And deciding to change that to a dialogue that isn't even related to Undying, it's interesting. It's like the idea didn't fit. It could have been changed to see Undying being taken away or something like that, but they changed it to a dialogue about Tina, and it just so happened that it fits way too well with the prophecy. And not only that, it shows the event of the Lord of Skins being clipped red by blades. But exactly like the prophecy, it doesn't show what happens to Tina afterward. If Tina dies or lives, it doesn't matter. It always shows how the TV is being smashed, because that's the only thing that is supposed to happen. Nothing else matters to the prophecy. I would like to clarify that this dialogue is not in the game, it's unused content. And I think it's important because it shows that this dialogue didn't fit the idea they had for the Shadow Crystal dialogue. The other dialogue that interests me is this one. You held the crystal up to your eye. For some strange reason, the prophecy text does not warp in the Shadow Crystal lens. You shook the crystal. However, nothing changed. This dialogue is why I think the Shadow Crystal showed the prophecy, or at least a different iteration of it. The prophecy can't be taken away, and even when looking through a crystal that shows a whole different world, the words of the prophecy stay clear as day. This makes me think of everything we already talked about. Everything around the prophecy can change, but the prophecy will stay the same no matter what. Exactly like the last example, and with everything we talk about the prophecy. So if the shadow crystals are showing stuff from the prophecy, what about the other dialogues? The others don't relate to the prophecy panels directly, so how does it fit into the theory? Well, because it's not showing just the prophecy, it's showing alternative ways it could play out, and I think I can prove it. You look through the glass. For some strange reason, for just a brief moment, you thought you saw Noel close against you, whispering. You put the glass to your ear. Of course, that didn't do anything. The dialogue that appears when you use the shadow crystal in the holiday manner. A lot of people have pointed this out already, but this dialogue describes almost perfectly the weird road scene from chapter 4 in the same area. And I think this is what was meant to show us what the shadow crystals actually do, because Noel getting close to Chris and whispering something, it's exactly what she does in that scene. And this brings to the question of why specifically that scene from chapter 4. No other Shadow Crystal dialogue describes a moment from the weird route except for this one. For me, the answer is that not every dialogue is related to the weird route, but to a different way that the prophecy could play out. as I mentioned before, but this one specific, for me, it's the biggest point of evidence. But for that, I need to talk about the weird droughts relationship with the prophecy. Remember a while ago when we were talking about the girl and the prophecy panel that depicts her? Remember all that talk about why I think the image of the panel isn't a reliable way to prove who is the girl that was set up for this argument. As we talked about before, the prophecy is really vague about how it's gonna come to pass. That it will come to pass. With the girl panel, the prophecy states the second hero, the girl, with hope crossed on her heart. And then the second panel that names the girl states love finds its way to the girl. That's everything we know that the prophecy says about the second hero, and that's basically 3 characteristics that defines who the hero is. She needs to be a girl, she needs to have hope cross on her heart, and love has to find its way to her. That's everything that it's asked for the second hero. There isn't another characteristic that would immediately clarify who the girl is, except for these 3 things, and there are only 2 characters that fit the description, Noel and Susie. Yes, I am arguing that both Noel and Susie are the second hero. Specifically, I think Susie is the hero during a normal run of Deltarune, and I think Noel is the girl during the weird route. For starters, both of them are girls, but both of them have hope crossed on their heart. Susie has the hope of saving the world, of both saving the dark worlds and the light world. She has the hope of beating the prophecy for good. She does in fact has hope crossed on her heart. She hopes for freedom. Noel also has hope on her heart. Hopes to find death one day. Hope that she carries for at least 7 years if we believe that the How to Draw Dragons book was borrowed around the same time Death disappeared. She has so much hope of finding her that she reads every email, including spam email, just in case someone finds her. Yes, I would argue that Noel has hope crossing her heart. She also has hope for her father to get better, for getting back to the old times, to reconnecting with Chris. Her heart is crossed with hope. And in the weird route, it's even more true. Not only she has hope of finding death, she has the hope of freeing herself from whatever controls her and Chris, and in her trance, hope to become stronger. Or in the weird route, she hopes for freedom as well. Both of them hope, and both of them hope for the same thing. Freedom for whatever is holding them back at the moment. For me, it's easy to say both Noel and Susie have hope crossing their heart, hope for freedom. But what about the third characteristic? Love finds way to the girl. Well, both have that too. Susie, during the main round, finds love. The love of her friends, Chris and Francie. A love that drives Chris to break out of her control temporarily to protect her. A love so deep that makes Francie have hope for the future that doesn't tie him to the prophecy. And she finds a romantic love as well. She obviously finds love on Noel, someone who has a huge crush on her and never saw Susie as a monster. Someone who she can share and be weird with. And if you're a dirty cheaper like me, that also counts crazy. But I'm going out of canon stuff here. All of this is exactly what the prophecy asked out of the girl. Love found its way to the girl. The Noel case is way more interesting. The weird route puts so much focus on the underlying romantic themes that Chris and Noel's relationship has, that it twisted and removes every part of it that gives Chris and Noel their identity. Chris is treated as a generic RPG protagonist, forcing them into the heteronormative role with a relationship with Noel, and Noel falls in the role of the girl next door, the romantic interest of the protagonist, someone who depends on her partner and can't be on herself. And the scene in the Holy Manor during the Weird Road is a perfect example of this. Noel wants to talk to Chris, alone. She wants to talk about last night, a night post-Snowgrave. She talks about how every time she closes her eyes, she could only see snow, and this terrified her to the point she couldn't sleep anymore. She was scared that what happened in the cyber city was real, but Chris got to her house in the middle of the night when we couldn't see them and told her that what happened wasn't real. That was a prank, that they were sorry for stealing her watch, that Burley would be okay. Noel talks about how Chris's voice, even when tired and shaky, was different. She felt like it was a voice that she hadn't heard for a long time. She cried as she celebrated that Chris was back. Then, as we enter Chris's body, she gets close to them, slowly to the point of whispering, talking about how Chris grabbed her hand and took a thorn from her finger, and that Chris told her that when she sees them them again, not to mention what happened that night. And as Chris gathers all their strength to cover Noel's mouth, she stops them and tells them that it's okay, it's just them. And she mentions that Chris told her not to talk about last night because someone might hear, and ask who it's going to hear. We answer. The room fills with a cold wind and she realizes what is happening. We slowly take control of her as we answer questions she only thought of and never said. We equip the thorn ring on her finger in a way that mirrors a marriage proposal. Chris and Noel are bound together forever because of her influence. Love found itself to the girl. A forced love, but love nonetheless. Interestingly enough, Susie doesn't get to have a scene with Noel in this chapter. Susie doesn't have those adorable scenes with her crush. In this case, she isn't the girl anymore. She doesn't get to have love, but our Noel does. This, for me, confirms the idea that Susie and Noel are the girl, but in different routes. Susie during the normal route and Noel during the weird route. And this for me also confirms that the Shadow Crystal shows you different scenarios of how the prophecy could go through. The prophecy in both routes is 100% true and accurate. Everything it predicts happens in the weird route, arguably except for Queen's panel, but it could have happened off screen with when Queen was looking for Burley, and reality's prophecy doesn't say that any hero has to be in the chariot, and even then everything else happens the same way that it happened in the normal route, except that the girl is a different person. This doesn't alter the prophecy, as a lot of people seem to think. The prophecy is the same, the only difference is that the girl now it's Noel. If the Shadow Crystal shows us different ways the prophecy comes to happen, then what about the other dialogues? You look through the glass. For some strange reason, for just a brief moment, you thought you saw Susie glaring at you coldly. But when you move the glass away, you see her looking at you, smiling and making a rude gesture. For me, this one is another point in favor of the visions being different ways the prophecy comes to pass. During chapter 1, right after we enter a castle town for the first time, Alphys realizes that she's missing her chuck, and sets Susie and Chris to get the chuck together. In this scene, Noel asks Alphys to send her and Susie instead of Chris, but what would have happened if that was the case? But if Chris, Susie and Noel went together? Or just Chris and Noel? I think this vision is about a situation like that. Another way that the prophecy could go through. Noel being the girl in this scenario, and Susie not even entering the dark world, or entering it and being the dragon. As you might know, in the dialogue with Gerson after the optional fight with him in chapter 4, Susie asks him what character of Dragon Blazers she would be, and Gerson answers, the dragon. Some people thought that as proof that Susie isn't the second hero, but for me that's not true. We don't know anything about the dragon in Dragon Blazers, but we do know something about the dragon in Of the Hammer. Chapter 1, The March of the Dark King, the heroes defeat the king and stop the dragon. In chapter 1 of Lord of the Rings, the heroes defeat the dragon. Considering Dragon Blazers is an adaptation of Lord of the Rings, it's easy to assume that it might be the same there too. The chapter is a direct parallel to Dark Kingdom, and the heroes do in fact fight a dragon in that chapter, Susie. So even if Susie is in fact the hero, she can also be the dragon. We don't know what the prophecy says about a dragon. Again, some of the texts were lost, but if there has to be a dragon in chapter 1, then Susie was both the dragon and the girl. In a hypothetical chapter 1 where Susie didn't go to the closet with Chris, or she went with Chris and Noel, she must have kept her role of the dragon, and Chris and Noel must have to fight her as well. And for me, the Shadow Crystal shows the outcome. Susie staring coolly at Chris because they are friends in this hypothetical chapter 1, and she's angry because Chris and Noel beat her in a fight. Of course this is hypothetical, but I feel like it fits. The last dialogue we're going to talk about is the following. You look through the glass. For some strange reason, for just a brief moment, you thought you saw it through your own hand. If you have followed this video carefully, I think you understand what I mean here. But for the rest of you, I think this one shows a variation of the prophecy where Chris isn't the one with the soul, meaning that Chris is in the cage. But just keep this one in mind for the future. I'll bring this dialogue up later. With every dialogue accounted for now, I can share my thoughts on how the game will end. I believe that there will be 3 endings.
one of the normal route, one of the weird route, and one for the Shadow Crystal run. With Mist, I hear you ask, and the Steam page is clearly stated that there will be only one ending, and to that I reply that yes, I do think all 3 endings will be the same. I know it's confusing, but I didn't wrote all of this video just to leave you hanging. With everything we already established, that 2 different people can be and are the second hero in the prophecy. Noel is the second hero on the weird route and Susie the second hero in the normal route. But if the game only is going to have one ending, then how's that gonna work? Well, because the story isn't really changing, or more specifically, the prophecy will still be the same. So the ending of the prophecy is still the same. I believe that either Noel or Susie, depending on the route you're playing, is going to kill Chris at the end of the game, fulfilling the prophecy. I believe it's going to go like this. Susie will find out about the Night conspiracy, that Chris is working with the Night, and she will figure it out that Ramsey somehow also knew about this, breaking the fragile trust she gave them. Ramsey will split up, similar how the wizard leaves the party in Dragon Blazers, and we are going to have to find a way to stop the roaring. But Chris by themselves isn't enough to close all the fountains that roar through the sky, and time is running thin. And Susie, wanting to forget all the time she spent with her best friend that knowingly endangered her and everyone they care about, decides to complete the prophecy, knowing that that's the only way that they can save the world. She might hesitate, she might hate what she's doing, but as the last attack hit Chris, the soul is freed from them, and we gain the ability to close all the fountains. And as the angel finally meets with its desire of witnessing the end of Deltarune, Susie loses all the hope she had, and all the love she found is lost. The world might be saved, but things only continue to get worse. Susie doesn't trust anymore. Her relationship with Noel and Rosie shattered with the cage. But to save the world, there's only one way. The girl must shatter the cage. Now, I don't fully believe the game is going to go down like this. I don't believe Susie will immediately turn to Chris, but something will trigger the point when she can't handle it anymore. Maybe something about this and how Chris lied about the Night and Noel. Maybe something related to her background or her traumas. Maybe she figures out that Chris wanted all this to happen and fully knowing that it would hurt Susie in the process. Finally confirming her biggest fear. No one would like to be her friend anyway. But I do think it's going to go like that. I fully believe that no matter what we do in the normal route, the game is going to end with Susie killing Chris, with the girl channeling the gates. With the weird route, I think it's easier to imagine. What we're doing to Noel is not going to go unnoticed by Susie for long. Chapter 5 most than definitely has a weird route section in the Dark World with Noel, or at least a good setup for us to use Noel to enter the shelter for chapter 6 and 7. And as the sword route shows us before, we will end up using Noel at her fullest. The roaring in this case might go down the same way that it did in the normal route, but I believe this time things are going to be a lot colder. While destroying and freezing everything in our path, we might finally believe that we might break the prophecy, but Ramsey and Susie stops us. I believe here we're going to hear the full version of Versus Susie, and by her own will, she will tank one snowgrave after another, but the only thing she will manage to do is to remove the ring from Noel's hand. Noel finally coming back to her senses, only to see how her crush is freezing almost to death in front of her. She looks back at Chris being forced got towards her to put on the ring, and almost as a reaction, Noel casts her final snowgrave. The girl will channel the cage, and the world will be saved, but this time as the fountains close slowly, soft white snow falls on town. I do believe something like this will happen. I can't see the figures, I cannot predict how it's going to actually go, but I can say for certain that Noel will kill, not only because this is the most satisfying ending for the weird route in my opinion, but because it's the same ending as the one from the normal route. It goes as simple as this. The roaring starts by any means, Susie realizes that she has been used, the fight between Chris and Susie occurs, and then all hope is lost. The last prophecy, the story ends. To save the world, there's only one way, the girl will shatter the gates. Only then will the worlds be saved. Technically, nothing changed. All the events repeat the same, events that are heavily implied to happen in the future because of the context in game.
We know that the roaring will happen. We know that Susie has finally seen our soul. We know that Susie is suspicious of Chris in both routes, and that might end in a horrible situation for her. So everything makes sense. We also know that something horrible will happen as the last prophecy, and Chris' themes of sacrifice and self-worth is more than possible that Chris will be the one who dies at the end of the game. So everything applies to both scenarios. The only thing that changes is the way it happens. Exactly the same way we said the prophecy works. I think the game has just one ending because the prophecy has just one ending, but the ending might and will be extremely different in context depending on the route you're playing. I'm almost fully convinced this is the point, that this is how it's going to go. All the themes of nostalgia, of reinterpretation, of stories, of video games, music and movies, the themes of freedom and self-worth all end up to this point. There is no way, no possible way to stop the prophecy no matter what. No matter how much you break Noel, Chris, Susie and Ramsey, no matter how many lives you ruin or how many lives you save, in the end, it's the same. To save the worlds, there's only one way. The girl will shatter the cage. Only then will the worlds be saved. But there's one thing that's missing from this ending. Something that isn't shining through the darkness like it should. Those endings are missing the most important thing that we all can have when the world is against us. This story is missing hope. Hope to change destiny is one of the most important themes of the game. I think it won't be different for the ending. I believe that after we try everything, we'll still have the hope to choose our own ending. And the way we're going to do that, it's by what the game has been telling us about time and time again. We will reinterpret the prophecy. But how are we going to reinterpret the prophecy? We understand that we can't avoid what the prophecy says, but we can change the context and the way it happens. But how are we going to do that? I think we'll do it in the same way as Gerson reinterpreted the prophecy to make Lord of the Hammer. We're going to write our own story around the prophecy. We're going to do that with what Gerson himself told us to do, a white pen called hope. During the Dark Sanctuary in Chapter 4, you can find 3 different sets of notes. These ones are gold instead of the blue the prophecy's panels normally are in the Star Wars. After finding them, you can go to the golden piano note from the old man's study and then go back and into the new open door. There you will be able to find Gerson, the Hammer of Justice. If you win, you'll earn the best in slot weapon for Susie, but that's not the important part. The important part is that Gerson dialogue during this fight. Did you ever heard that old tale? Yes, the old tale, based upon the prophecy, Lord of the Hammer. I think I heard about that. What happens? Chapter 1, The March of the Dark King. The heroes defeat the king and stop the dragon. Chapter 2, The City of the Shining. The heroes do battle in chariots to save the queen. Chapter 3, The Isles of Northern Light. The hero travels amongst islands and catch a glimpse of a lost land. Chapter 4, The Trials of the Holy Hammer. A great smith gives the heroes a terrible weapon. Chapter 5, The Field of Pink and Gold. The past curtain is charred in an inferno of jealousy. What happens next? Who knows? There was only one more chapter after that, it all stopped. The next book, it never did get written. The story, it became so grand, so overwhelming. Sometimes it swallowed up the author himself, the ones who could write the next page, the youth. The pen was lying there for them to pick up, to make the next page. They never did. But you, my dear, I see a story lit up in your eyes, burning bright, burning black, burning up everything. The bell's ringing now, since we reached the final rounds. So how do you think it all ends? No, how do you want it to end? An ending, if I could choose, I guess. I wouldn't have an ending. It's just better if stuff just goes on forever, right? Well, ain't that something? At this late hour, with the bells ringing out their justice, you choose eternity. But there is one thing that can override dark, a white pen known as hope. Miss, I believe this is what you hold. Me? Nah, Chris has the pen. My weapon is like a hairbrush or something. Is that so? Is that so? Yeah, now shut up and give me the dogs. Gerson directly tells us what we're supposed to do. We are supposed to write our own ending, and the only way to do that is with the white pen of hope. He also mentions that the Lord of the Hammer was reading up to chapter 5, and after that he couldn't write more. He hoped the youth would pick up a pen and they would write an ending for themselves, but they never did. As we established before, each chapter of Lord of the Hammer relates to a chapter from Deltarune, meaning that chapter 5 is the last chapter before we must write the ending. To clarify, I don't mean this literally. I don't think Toby Fox would make us make the ending of the game. I mean this metaphorically, giving us only 2 more chapters to find a way to do it. And Susie holds the key to do that. The same way she broke through gameplay mechanics, teaching herself and Ralsei how to act. And the same way she has been dealing with everything that has been in her way, by finding her own way around it, by using her white pen, known as hope. I don't think she knows that yet. I don't think she understands how important it is for her to continue to hope, and how essential her creativity and uniqueness are to save the world in the best way possible. But we can help with that. I actually lied to you before. Gerson doesn't give us only the acts of justice. He also gives Susie a shadow crystal. I told you we were talking about it more. As we established before, the shadow crystals show a different world where the prophecy is still unbreakable, but it's playing out in a different way from the story we are playing. We can see the weird out, we can see a world where Susie never entered the Dark Worlds or never befriended Chris. Those are different interpretations of the prophecy, interpretations that no matter what happens will end up in the same way that every single other interpretation, because the prophecy can't be changed. And in a recent tweet from Toy Fox, he shows us a dialogue that Sean will have in chapter 5. Chris, I suppose I owe you an explanation about all this. No, you no doubt have realized yourself by now. The shadow crystals are far more than mere pieces of glass. In actuality, they contain a certain power. You could call this power will. No, perhaps will isn't right. The power they contain is. People have been saying that this dialogue will reveal that the shadow crystals are pure determination, or somehow they contain determination. But I personally believe that what they are, it's way more important for Deltarune's teams. I think they are hope. Still, it could be also determination in the universe, but the point is the same. One doesn't remove the other, though I think it will be hope and not determination in a literal way. This dialogue not only gives us the information, but it also implies that Sean wanted them for something else. Something that they already told us. They will make something for us. The pure crystal. The pure crystal isn't something in the game at the moment, but it's something in the game files. The flavor text of the pure crystal says, the shadow purified by the cat. So it's pretty easy to assume this is the result of the 5 shadow crystals we'll get by chapter 5. And I believe that the pure crystal is exactly what we need to give Susie to get the third ending of the prophecy. If the shadow crystals give you a glimpse into a different interpretation of the prophecy, then it's pretty possible that a pure crystal will allow you to see clearly these other stories that are playing parallel to ours. And that will be what gives Susie the clue to write her own ending. Interpretation exists because inspiration exists. Inspiration is something that Toby isn't shy to talk about. Undertale was heavily inspired by Airbound and Homestuck. All the music in his games are made using samples for video games he likes, and his stories are heavily inspired by others. And with how relevant interpretation is for Deltarune, I think inspiration will do the same. I believe that getting the shadow crystals, fighting every secret boss, especially Gerson, will give Susie the inspiration she needs to start to think how to make a better ending. And the pure crystal will be the tool she uses to see other endings and understand what she must do. She will write a better ending for herself, an ending where she, Ralsei, and Noel can have a happy ending. She might even find a way to save Tess, or at least get closer to Noel, but especially, she will write an ending where Chris lives. You look through the glass. For some strange reason, for just a brief moment, you thought you saw through your hand. This dialogue of the Shadow Crystal is exactly what I think will save Chris. This dialogue shows a world where Chris isn't there. We don't know the details, but we can at least make the logical connection that Chris isn't shown in this vision. And if my theory that the Shadow Crystal chose us to alternate paths of the prophecy, then for me, the most obvious answer is that this dialogue talks about a world where Chris isn't the cage, but then who is it? As we talked about way before in this video, the prophecy panels aren't at all specific. Those panels can be interpreted in all sorts of ways, and we did that with the panel of the girl, it being both about Susie and Noel, because both of them qualify for the little description the second hero gets. But what about the first hero, the cage? What are the requirements for someone to be the cage? There are only two characteristics for it. The cage with human soul and parts. It has to have human parts and it has to have a soul or soul. At first glance, you might think that Chris is the only person who qualifies to be the first hero. But there is one person who could be the cage as well. And we will find them in the place where it all started, the cone maker scene. Yes, I'm talking about the vessel. The game saves the choices that you made in the corner making sequence, and there's even default settings in case you start the game from a later chapter in a new save. It doesn't make a lot of sense to save all this information for something that was supposedly discarded and won't be used at a later date. So why did Toby and his team decided to keep it? Well, because we will need it for the ending of the game. The vessel is the second option to be the cage. The cage is obviously a gunner based upon Chris Tremor, a human. Therefore the vessel has to have human parts. And even then, without the reference to Chris losing their hand, we might just give one to the vessel. And they can definitely hold their soul. After all, we were making it to contain our soul in the first place. We were supposed to play the game as the vessel, not as Chris. But Chris stopped that from happening and forced the soul upon themselves. Now they became the vessel, destined to be the cage of the prophecy, foretold to be killed by Susie. But Susie is trying to avoid that. Let's say Susie is trying her best to find a way to save the world, and also save Chris, fully knowing that Chris will die if they follow the prophecy. So she uses the pure crystal we got from Sean because she remembers the shadow crystal Gerson gave her, and she sees a world where the prophecy is still happening like in her story, but something is different. This is nowhere to be found, but a monochrome copy of them is, and they are holding Chris's soul. She sees this and maybe she remembers seeing this thing at the shelter, or maybe she keeps it in mind in case she finds it in the future. But when she does find it, she forces the soul out of Chris and puts it inside of the vessel. Now Chris is not the cage anymore because they have no soul, so they can't be the cage by the prophecy itself. Now, in this version of the story, where Susie won't lose hope, she writes a better ending for the story. The cage isn't Chris in her version of Deltarune. The cage eats the vessel, and beating up the creature that torments her best friend, it's a hell of a lot easier to do than to kill said best friend. There, the real last battle begins, and to save the world there's only one way. They can almost shatter the cage. With the cage shattered, the worlds are safe. The running stops and everyone is okay. Ralphie, Noel, Susie, maybe even Des, and now also Chris, it's saved. With hope, Susie would have managed to cheat fate. She reinterpreted the prophecy and wrote her own story. I think this is what Deltarune is going to be. A story about nostalgia, love, and tales. A story about sacrifice, about loss, and about freedom. A story about inspiration, interpretation, and hope. And for me, this is the best ending for all these themes. The same ending, no matter what. But with hope, with love, and with the correct installation, you can make the best of anything you want. You could even rewrite fate in your favor. After all, there are more important things that reach in the end. And I think this story is just so fitting for a game like this. A bit ago I asked you, what did you think Toby Fox decided to release the game in chapters? The answer? It was to make the minds based around our theories. But I believe there's another reason. And these theories people make, theories that contradict or support each other constantly, extremely different readings of the characters and the themes of the game. That's just doing exactly the same thing that the game told us to do. It's not theory video you watch, or tweet about Deltarune you read. each piece of art of a use or narratives people create based on Deltarune. All of that is just the same thing that Deltarune is about. Its story is just another interpretation of Deltarune. It's sweet, it's a piece of art, it's song, it's animation, it's interpretation of my friend Des, each possible candidate for the night. All chips, all of everything this beautiful fandom has created, it's a unique interpretation of the same game we all know and love so deeply. And for me, that's the point. Because for me, Deltarune is as big as you want it to be. And I invite you to come behind the wall with me, to keep creating your own stories, your own interpretations of this old tale. But this is just my interpretation of Deltarune, and that's Deltarune reinterpretation theory. I've been recording for 1 hour and 10 minutes right now, and this is not the only time I sat down to record. There are at least other 4 or 5 hours of me talking about this video. And kids, do not record that long if you have asthma without taking breaks. I am about to die. Anyway, thank you for getting to the end of the video. I know this might have been long and it might have been really painful considering that my microphone isn't that good and my editing skills are like non-existent, but I hope you enjoyed it still, or at least got the idea I wanted to share with the people of the world. This theory might not even be a theory and more fun reading of the themes of Deltarune that are not even close to what it's actually supposed to be. I think it's worth to be shared. I think every theory is worth to be shared, even if it's a stupid theory or it doesn't make any sense or whatever. Every theory is important. Interestingly enough, while I was making this video, I finished watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure and Stone Ocean, the last part of the first big universe from JoJo's. Well, this is a spoiler, but the last part also deals with these themes, and I felt so validated that another artist was talking about the same thing. So yeah, what I'm saying is that Deltarune is like JoJo's. I hope you all like this video. Again, thank you for going to the end. I don't know what to say. I really want to make more videos. Maybe my quality isn't the best and you might not want me to make more videos. If that's the case, I understand. But if you all are interested of me making more videos about the stuff I mentioned in this video or another ideas, feel free to let me know. There's stuff I really want to talk about, like this, like a friend. And specifically, another idea I had is that I really wanted to talk about how the dark worlds work, because I think the dark worlds work like Silent Hill, the horror game. It's a weird, but whatever, that's another video. If you guys are interested, let me know. If you guys want, you can follow me. It doesn't really matter. I like you guys to follow me because I think you will really need it. I have a Twitter where I share my art. Because I got so hyperfixated on JoJo's, I actually drew an original stand from Noel Holiday. A bit of a cringe thing to do, but I am very artistic. And I have been also drawing stuff from Deltarune as Silent Hill and stuff like that. Nothing too crazy, there's not a lot there to talk about, but if you guys are interested, I recommend you to follow me if you want. And that's about it. Again, thank you, and I'll see you around if you want.